In forensics, we often say the structure always tells its story, if you know how to listen. Long after the dust has settled, after the sirens have faded, and the headlines have turned to whispers, the bones of a fallen building whisper in the language of cracks, fractures, and misaligned steel. The tower, with no ties, the ruined ambition on the red earth of Abuja, had a story to tell. A story not just of concrete and steel, but of silence, shortcuts, and the fatal cost of neglect. As we reconstructed the final moments of the tower's life, our first clue came not from the ground, but from the middle. The collapse began from the heart of the structure, not the topmost slab, nor the foundation deep below. This was a rare signature in the world of structural failures. Most often, buildings fail at their weakest points, overloaded foundations, or at the top where wind and weight conspire. But here, the middle floor sagged and buckled, setting off a domino of destruction above and below. This detail, almost lost beneath the chaos, pointed to a specific culprit. Slab failure. Not a catastrophic soil collapse, nor an explosive overload from above, but a quiet, insidious breakdown in the very plate that should have tied the whole tower together. We set out to unravel the sequence, drawing on every tool in the modern forensic engineer's arsenal. We ran finite element simulations, feeding the original design parameters into digital models and comparing them to what the construction crew had actually built. The differences were not subtle. They screamed at us in the language of numbers and dimensions. The blueprints called for reinforcement bars spaced closely at 150 millimeters, a lattice of steel meant to catch and redistribute every stress. But when we sampled the fallen slabs, the real spacing stretched to 350 millimeters and more. Gaps wide enough to let through not just water, but failure itself. The beams, designed to be sturdy at 300 millimeters in width, had been poured at just 180 millimeters in critical sections, and the slabs themselves, the very stage on which the whole drama played out, varied in depth from one end to the next, a telltale sign of uneven formwork and poor pouring control. The concrete was pockmarked, riddled with air pockets where it should have been solid. It was as if the building had been assembled not as a fortress, but as a facade, strong only on the drawings, brittle in reality. As we layered the original blueprints over our as-built scans, the mismatch was impossible to ignore. This tower, the one that stood for just a moment before it fell, was never the tower that was designed. It was a ghost, a structure that never truly existed. But the most damning evidence was invisible to the casual eye. It hid in the paperwork, or the absence of it. The process of building a tower is supposed to be punctuated by signatures, signs of accountability at every stage, structural sign-offs, load test reports, daily logs. Each signature is a promise. I have checked, and this is safe. But in our audit, we found blank spaces where those signatures should have been. The load test report, crucial for verifying that the slabs could bear their intended weight, was unsigned. The structural sign-off, the final blessing before the next phase of construction, was missing entirely. This meant only one thing: someone skipped the checks. Whether by intention or neglect, the safety net had been pulled away. And when the first cracks appeared, there was no one to stop the chain reaction. We spoke with engineers who had worked on the project, some willing to go on record, others only in hushed, anonymous interviews. One site supervisor said, "We told them the column reinforcements didn't match what was on the drawing. They said to proceed anyway." Another whispered of rushed schedules, of pressure to impress investors, of corners cut because no one was watching. This was not just an engineering failure. This was regulatory blindness. The oversight body, tasked with protecting the public, had no idea what was happening on site. Inspections that should have been routine became sporadic or symbolic. The building rose, floor after floor, on a foundation not of concrete, but of unchecked ambition and unearned trust. The lessons of the tower with no ties are buried deep within its shattered remains, but they are not lost. First, quality control is not a document. It is a discipline, a daily practice that refuses to accept the easy answer, the quick fix, the unsigned report. Every slab, every beam, every rebar tie is a question asked. Is this enough? And the only honest answer comes from the discipline to check, to measure, and to sign your name with pride. Second, supervision is not a job. It is a responsibility. It is the burden carried by every engineer, every foreman, every inspector who steps onto a site. It is the knowledge that lives depend on your vigilance. That shortcuts taken today become tragedies tomorrow. Third, in design, every invisible line matters. The ties that bind a slab to its column, the reinforcement that hides within concrete, the continuity that makes a structure more than a pile of materials. These are the lines that cannot be skipped. Cutting a corner in design may feel invisible, a clever way to save time or money. But gravity is the ultimate auditor. It exposes every lie, every omission, every compromise. As we pieced together the timeline of failure, we found that the warning signs had been there all along. The absence of a full-time structural engineer on site. The rush to pour foundations before soil tests were complete. The decision to load test slabs with thousands of liters of water without a drainage plan. Each decision, taken alone, might have seemed minor. Together, they formed a chain that could only end in collapse. But perhaps the most haunting lesson is this. When engineers are silent, buildings scream. The cracks that spread across the slabs were not just flaws in concrete. They were the voice of the structure, pleading for attention. The sagging beams, the bowed columns, the water pooling where it should not. These were warnings. Unheeded because those who saw them felt powerless or unheard. In the aftermath, as legal analysts and whistleblowers dissected what went wrong, the question remained, how do we make sure it never happens again? The answer lies not just in stricter codes or more inspectors, but in a culture of integrity, a culture where every person on site understands that safety is not negotiable, that every corner left unconnected is a potential gap for disaster. The tower, with no ties, was not the first structure to fall, nor will it be the last. But its fall was not meaningless. It was an autopsy in concrete, a lesson written in the language of cracks and dust. So what, then, is the legacy of this collapse? It is a reminder that every building is a living contract between those who design, those who build, and those who inhabit. That trust is not built in boardrooms or on glossy brochures, but in the unseen ties that bind structure to structure and person to person. When a building falls, it is easy to blame one person, one error, one moment of oversight. But in truth, collapse is rarely so simple. It is the sum of many small failures, each one a gap in the chain of responsibility. In Abuja, those gaps were wide enough for a tower to fall through. In the months that followed, the site remained cordoned off. The red earth, once upturned for ambition, settled again into silence. But beneath that silence, the lessons lingered. Young engineers visited the site, tracing the lines of rebar, measuring the depth of failed slabs. Professors brought students, pointing out where the ties should have been, explaining the importance of load paths and redundancy. For the families who had hoped to live in the tower, the loss was not just material. It was a loss of faith, in promises made, in systems meant to protect. For the city, the collapse was a scar, a cautionary tale etched into the skyline. But out of every collapse comes the possibility of renewal. In the aftermath, regulatory bodies tightened their oversight. New projects were required to submit not just designs, but proof of ongoing inspections. Site supervisors were empowered to halt work if discrepancies were found, no longer silenced by deadlines or pressure. And across the industry, a quiet revolution began. Engineers spoke up. Whistleblowers were protected, not punished. Standards, once seen as obstacles, became shields. The invisible ties, in paperwork, in steel, in the shared responsibility of all who build, grew stronger. In time, the story of the tower with no ties became a case study, taught in universities and cited in conferences. It became a touchstone for discussions on engineering ethics, on the importance of quality control, on the dangers of regulatory complacency. Its legacy was not the rubble left behind, but the resolve it inspired. So remember this, buildings are not just structures, they are stories of dreams and discipline, of failure and resilience. Every slab, every tie, every signature is a sentence in that story. When we cut corners, we erase the lines that hold it together. The tower with no ties fell not because of an act of God, but because of a series of human decisions, each one a thread pulled from the fabric of safety until nothing remained to hold it up. Let this be the lesson, buried but not forgotten. In engineering, when you do not connect the lines, people fall through the gaps. And in those gaps, there is no room for excuses, only for the silent testimony of a structure that tried to warn us, and the hope that next time we will listen. Because in the secret language of structures, every crack is a question, every failure is an answer, and every collapse is a plea for vigilance, integrity, and the courage to speak up before it is too late. As the sun sets over the skyline of Abuja, the unfinished tower stands as both a warning and a challenge, a reminder that the true measure of any structure is not in how high it rises, but in how well it is tied, from foundation to crown, by the invisible bonds of knowledge, care, and responsibility. Listen to the structures. They are always telling us something.